The echo of shattering glass rang through the dusty evening air as Kathleen Vance upturned the last amber drops of whiskey onto the parched ground outside the Calistoga saloon. Her hands trembling but her eyes burning with a newfound resolve that caught the attention of every patron on the weathered porch, especially that of the tall, sun-bronzed cowboy, leaning against the hitching post with his hat tipped low. "I'm done with that life," she declared, her voice steady despite the weight of all the years those words carried. The year was 1876, and Calistoga, California was booming with the prosperity of the nearby silver mines and the healing reputation of its natural hot springs. The small town nestled in the northern Napa Valley had drawn all manner of folk seeking fortune, healing, or simply a fresh start, and Kathleen Vance counted herself firmly among the latter. The cowboy who witnessed her declaration wasn't a man given to involving himself in the affairs of others. Ryan Reynolds had spent the better part of the last decade keeping his own counsel, drifting between cattle drives and ranch work across the Western Territories. But something in the fierce determination of the woman's stance, the fire in her hazel eyes as she cast aside what he recognized as an expensive bottle of Kentucky bourbon, stirred his curiosity like nothing had in years. "That's quite the statement, madam," he said, pushing himself away from the post and stepping forward, the spurs on his well-worn boots jingling softly with each deliberate movement. "Good whiskey's hard to come by in these parts." Kathleen whirled, wisps of auburn hair escaping from beneath her modest bonnet, her cheeks flushed with emotion. Up close, Ryan could see the fine lines around her eyes that spoke of hard living, though she couldn't have been more than 25 years old. "Then perhaps you should have been quicker to catch it, sir," she replied, tipping her chin up defiantly. "But I assure you, there was nothing good about it." The few onlookers chuckled, though they quieted quickly when Ryan's steady gaze swept over them. He wasn't a man known for his temper, but there was something about him that suggested it wouldn't be wise to test it. "Ryan Reynolds," he said simply, extending a calloused hand. She hesitated, then accepted the handshake with a firm grip that surprised him. "Kathleen Vance." "Recently of San Francisco, though I suspect that news has traveled ahead of me." Indeed it had. Calistoga was small enough that word of the new arrival, a woman traveling alone, taking rooms at Mrs. Hawkins' boarding house, and inquiring about work had spread through town faster than a prairie fire. Speculation ran wild, particularly given her refined manner of speech that contrasted sharply with her modest, somewhat worn attire. "Can't say I pay much mind to gossip, Miss Vance," Ryan replied, releasing her hand. "Though I am curious what brings a lady to discard perfectly good spirits in such dramatic fashion." A flash of something vulnerability perhaps crossed her features before the steel returned to her spine. "A promise to myself, Mr. Reynolds, one I intend to keep." She straightened her shawl with deliberate movements. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." As she turned to leave, Ryan noticed the sidelong glances and whispers from the men gathered on the saloon porch. Most were harmless enough miners and cowhands with more curiosity than malice, but he didn't miss the cold, calculating look that crossed Silas Turner's face. Turner owned the largest saloon in town, a gambling house with a reputation that stretched as far as Sacramento. Something about the way Turner's eyes followed Kathleen made the hair on the back of Ryan's neck stand up. "Miss Vance," Ryan called after her, making a decision he hadn't consciously planned. "I'm heading toward the boarding house myself. Might I walk with you?" Kathleen paused, clearly weighing her desire for independence against the practical reality of being a woman alone in a town full of strangers. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds. I would appreciate that." As they walked down Calistoga's Main Street, The setting sun cast long shadows between the wooden buildings. The town had grown considerably in the last few years, boasting not only saloons and boarding houses but a proper hotel, several mercantiles, a schoolhouse, and even a small opera house that doubled as a church on Sundays. "You said you're from San Francisco?" Ryan asked, keeping a respectful distance as they navigated the uneven boardwalk. "Most recently," Kathleen answered, her gaze fixed ahead. "Though I've lived many places. You, Texas originally, been moving ever since the war ended." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. Many men had found themselves adrift after the conflict that tore the nation apart. "And what brings you to Calistoga, Mr. Reynolds? The waters or the silver?" "Neither. I'm working at the Thompson Ranch outside town, breaking horses mainly." "You have a gift with animals, then?" Ryan shrugged modestly. "I understand them. They don't lie or pretend to be something they're not." Kathleen's step faltered slightly, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "A rare quality indeed." They reached the neat white-painted boarding house at the end of the street, its small front garden a welcome splash of color against the dusty backdrop of the town. Before Kathleen could ascend the steps, the front door burst open and a small figure hurtled toward her. "Mama! Mama! Mrs. Hawkins, let me help make pie." A girl of about 6 with the same auburn hair as Kathleen wrapped her arms around her mother's skirts, face tilted up in excitement. Ryan tried to mask his surprise. Nothing in the town gossip had mentioned a child. "That's wonderful, Lucy," Kathleen said, smoothing her daughter's hair with a tenderness that transformed her face. "Did you save a piece for me?" "2 pieces. One for you and one for me for after supper." The girl's attention shifted to Ryan, her curious green eyes studying him without shyness. "Who are you, Lucy?" Kathleen admonished gently. "Mind your manners." Ryan crouched down to the child's level, removing his hat. "Ryan Reynolds, at your service, Miss Lucy. I was just escorting your mama home." Lucy considered this solemnly before nodding. "Do you like pie, Mr. Reynolds?" A smile cracked through Ryan's typically stoic expression. "I believe pie might be the finest invention in all creation." The child grinned, revealing a missing front tooth. "Then you should stay for supper. Mrs. Hawkins made stew and there's enough for everyone. Isn't there, Mama?" Kathleen appeared momentarily flustered, caught between propriety and her daughter's innocent invitation. "I'm sure Mr. Reynolds has his own arrangements, sweetheart." In truth, Ryan had planned to grab a quick meal at the saloon before riding back to the ranch, but something about the hopefulness in Lucy's expression and the flicker of wariness in Kathleen's eyes made him reconsider. "I'd be honored to join you ladies if Mrs. Hawkins wouldn't mind another at her table," he said. Before Kathleen could respond, the boarding house door opened again, and a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands appeared on the porch. "I most certainly do not mind," she called down. "Any friend of Kathleen and Lucy is welcome at my table. Come in before the stew gets cold." And so Ryan Reynolds found himself seated at the polished oak table in Mrs. Hawkins' dining room, surrounded by the boarding house's other residents. A retired schoolteacher, a young clerk from the mercantile, and an elderly couple who had come to Calistoga for the healing waters. The atmosphere was warm and congenial, a stark contrast to the rowdy saloons where he typically took his meals. Throughout supper, Ryan observed Kathleen. She was reserved but gracious, deflecting questions about her past with practiced ease. Lucy, however, chattered freely, painting a picture of a life previously lived in San Francisco, where her mother had worked as a singer in what the girl innocently described as a grand house with red curtains and lots of music. Each time Lucy revealed such details, A flush would rise to Kathleen's cheeks, but she never silenced the child. Instead, she gently redirected the conversation, asking the schoolteacher about books or the clerk about news from Sacramento. When the apple pie was served, Lucy, proudly pointing out the sections she had helped crimp, Mrs. Hawkins turned her attention to Ryan. "And what about you, Mr. Reynolds? Will you be staying in Calistoga long?" Ryan took a bite of the excellent pie before answering. "That depends on the horses. Mr. Thompson has a new string of Mustangs that need gentling before winter." "You're that horse breaker everyone's talking about," the clerk said, recognition dawning. "They say you can tame the wildest bronc without breaking its spirit." Ryan shifted uncomfortably under the attention. "I just try to speak their language is all." "Is it very dangerous?" Lucy asked, eyes wide with concern. "It can be," Ryan admitted, "but most times horses only buck and fight because they're scared. Once they understand you're not out to hurt them, they settle right down." Kathleen studied him over the rim of her teacup, something thoughtful in her gaze. "And how do you make them understand that, Mr. Reynolds? Patience, consistency." His eyes met hers, "and keeping my promises." A faint smile touched her lips. "Admirable qualities." After dinner, as the other boarders retired to the parlor, Ryan found himself assisting Kathleen with drying the dishes while Lucy sat at the kitchen table, laboriously practicing her letters under Mrs. Hawkins' gentle guidance. "Thank you for joining us," Kathleen said quietly as she handed him a plate to dry. "Lucy doesn't often get to interact with respectable men." Ryan accepted the plate, careful not to let his fingers brush against hers. "She's a fine girl, bright." "Yes," Kathleen agreed, a mother's pride evident in her voice. "Too bright sometimes. She sees and remembers everything, including life in San Francisco." Kathleen's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Yes. The grand house with red curtains." Her eyes flashed up to his, defensive. "I was a singer, Mr. Reynolds. And yes, it was a saloon, but a high-class establishment. I never," she caught herself, glancing toward Lucy. "I made choices to keep my daughter fed and clothed. I won't apologize for that." "I wasn't asking for an apology," Ryan said softly. "We all do what we must to survive." She studied him for a long moment, perhaps searching for judgment in his face and finding none. "Yes, we do, but there comes a time when survival isn't enough anymore." Her gaze drifted to Lucy. "I want more for her. That's why I came to Calistoga. To start fresh, somewhere smaller, quieter." "And the whiskey," Kathleen's expression tightened. "Part of the old life. One I couldn't bring with me if I wanted things to be different." Ryan nodded, understanding more than she might have realized. He too carried habits from his past that needed breaking, ghosts that needed laying to rest. As the evening drew to a close, Ryan donned his hat and prepared to ride back to the Thompson ranch. Lucy, fighting sleep but insisting on saying goodbye, extracted a promise that he would visit again to tell her more about the horses. "Thank you again, Mr. Reynolds," Kathleen said as she walked him to the door, her daughter now drowsing against her shoulder. "Ryan," he corrected gently. She smiled, a genuine expression that softened the worry lines around her eyes. "Ryan, then, thank you for your kindness today. Just being neighborly, Miss Vance." "Kathleen," she offered in return. "Good night, Ryan." As he mounted his horse and turned toward the ranch, Ryan found himself glancing back at the warm light of the boarding house windows. Something about Kathleen Vance and her daughter had stirred emotions he'd long since buried, a longing for connection, for something more permanent than the transient life he'd been living. But Calistoga was just another stop on a long road. And women like Kathleen Vance, women with complicated pasts and fierce determination. To build something better, they didn't need drifters like him complicating their fresh starts. Still, as he rode through the star-studded night, Ryan couldn't help but wonder about the story behind that discarded whiskey bottle, and the promise Kathleen had made to herself that seemed to mean so much. The next week passed in a blur of hard work for both Kathleen and Ryan. She had secured a position as an assistant to Dr. Emily Morgan, the town's female physician who specialized in treating women and children. The doctor had been initially hesitant to hire someone without medical training, but Kathleen's calm demeanor in crisis demonstrated when a miner's wife arrived in labor during her interview, and her ability to soothe anxious patients quickly proved her value. Ryan, meanwhile, spent his days in the corral with Thompson's Mustangs, working from sunrise to sunset with the wild-eyed creatures. The work demanded his complete attention, but in quiet moments, his thoughts would drift to the auburn-haired woman and her precocious daughter. They crossed paths occasionally in town, a tip of his hat, as she hurried to the doctor's office, a brief exchange of pleasantries when they happened to visit the mercantile at the same time. Each encounter left Ryan with a lingering sense of wanting more, though he couldn't have articulated exactly what more might entail. It was on a rain-soaked Saturday afternoon that chance brought them together again. Ryan had come to town for supplies, and as he exited the mercantile, a sudden cloudburst sent townsfolk scurrying for shelter. Across the muddy street, he spotted Kathleen and Lucy, caught in the downpour without umbrellas. Without hesitation, he jogged toward them, shielding his purchases under his duster. "Ladies, over here." Kathleen looked up, relief washing over her face as she recognized him. Clutching Lucy's hand, she hurried toward the awning where Ryan stood. "Goodness," she gasped as they reached shelter, both of them already half-soaked. "That came from nowhere. California weather," Ryan said with a smile, "changes its mind faster than a politician on election day." Lucy giggled, pushing wet hair from her eyes. "We were going to the lending library, but now my books will get all wet." Ryan glanced down the street. The rain showed no signs of letting up, and the sky had darkened ominously. "I have a better idea. How about some hot chocolate at the hotel restaurant? My treat." Lucy's eyes lit up, but Kathleen hesitated. "That's very kind, but please, Mama," Lucy pleaded. "I'm so cold." Kathleen's resistance melted at her daughter's shivering form. "All right, but just until the rain passes." The Grand Calistoga Hotel boasted the finest restaurant in town, a place where Kathleen had not yet ventured, conscious of both her budget and her uncertain position in local society. As Ryan ushered them through the elegant lobby, she felt acutely aware of her damp hem and wind-blown hair. But if Ryan noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign of it. With the easy confidence of a man who moved through the world expecting it to accommodate him, he secured them a table near the fireplace and ordered hot chocolate and a plate of fresh pastries. As Lucy warmed herself by the fire, happily nibbling on a sugar-dusted bannock, Kathleen found herself studying Ryan across the table. In the genteel setting of the hotel restaurant, away from the dust of the street or the homey simplicity of Mrs. Hawkins' dining room, she noticed aspects of him she'd overlooked before: the intelligence in his gray-blue eyes, the way his rugged features softened when he smiled, the respectful way he addressed the serving staff. "You're staring, Miss Vance," he said quietly, amusement playing at the corners of his mouth. Kathleen felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was just thinking you seem at ease here. For a man who breaks wild horses for a living." "I wasn't always a horsebreaker," he replied, stirring his chocolate. "My father owned a shipping business in Galveston before the war. I grew up learning which fork to use first." "What happened?" she asked, then immediately regretted her directness. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." Ryan shook his head. "No need for apologies." The war happened, like it did to so many. Father lost his ships, then his will to rebuild. After he passed, I headed west, found I had a way with horses, and it was a skill that kept me fed. And your mother, a shadow crossed his face, lost her to fever when I was 14. I'm sorry, Kathleen said softly, understanding the ache of such a loss. My parents died in a riverboat accident when I was 16, left me alone in the world except for a distant cousin who made it clear I was an unwelcome burden. Ryan's eyes met hers, recognition of shared pain passing between them. And Lucy's father, Kathleen tensed, her fingers tightening around her cup. Another mistake from a desperate time. She glanced toward her daughter, ensuring she was out of earshot. He was a gambler passing through San Francisco, handsome, charming, and utterly faithless. By the time I discovered I was with child, he had moved on to fleece the next town. His loss, Ryan said simply. She's a treasure. Kathleen's expression softened as she looked at Lucy, who was now engaged in conversation with an elderly couple at the next table, regaling them with a story about a frog she had found in Dr. Morgan's garden. Yes, she is. Everything I do now is for her future. Including pouring out good whiskey, Ryan asked, his tone gentle rather than accusatory. Kathleen's gaze returned to him, measuring his reaction carefully. When Lucy's father left, I had few options. I could sew, but not well enough for a proper dressmaker's position. I could read and write, but had no formal training as a governess, so I took a position singing at the Golden Peacock. The saloon with the red curtains. She nodded. It began innocently enough. I sang, I served drinks, I smiled at the patrons, but over time, she took a steadying breath. The owner encouraged us to drink with the customers. The more they drank, the more they spent. Soon, I found myself needing the whiskey to get through each night, to dull the edges of what my life had become. Ryan listened without judgment, his steady gaze encouraging her to continue. 3 weeks ago, a man came into the Peacock, a doctor from Sacramento who had once courted me before I met Lucy's father. He recognized me, though I had changed considerably. Her voice faltered. The pity in his eyes, Ryan, it was like seeing myself through a window I'd kept shuttered. That night, I looked at Lucy sleeping in our small room above the saloon, and I knew I had to change course before it was too late. So you came to Calistoga. Dr. Wheeler, the man from the Peacock, mentioned Calistoga had a lady doctor who might need assistance. He gave me enough money for train fare and 2 weeks' lodging, asking nothing in return except a promise that I would make a better life for Lucy and myself. She smiled ruefully. The whiskey bottle was the last one I owned, carried with me out of habit. Pouring it out was my declaration of intent. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle patter, sunlight beginning to break through the clouds. Lucy returned to the table, her face smeared with sugar and chocolate, oblivious to the weight of the conversation that had passed between the adults. "Mr. Reynolds," she said seriously. "Mrs. Hawkins says you can judge a man's character by how he treats those who can do nothing for him. I think you must have very good character because you bought hot chocolate for us, and we can't do anything for you at all." Both adults stared at the child in surprise before breaking into laughter. "Lucy Vance," Kathleen said, trying to sound stern despite her amusement, "you have chocolate all over your face and you are being entirely too forward." Ryan, however, leaned toward Lucy with a conspiratorial smile. "Your Mrs. Hawkins is a wise woman. But I must disagree with one thing: you and your mother have done something for me." His eyes flickered briefly to Kathleen. "You've reminded me that there's more to life than work and solitude." As they prepared to leave, the rain having ceased entirely, Ryan settled their bill and escorted them outside. The streets of Calistoga glistened in the renewed sunlight, the air fresh with the scent of wet earth and pine from the surrounding hills. "Thank you for the chocolate and conversation," Kathleen said as they paused at the corner where their paths would diverge, she and Lucy toward the boarding house, Ryan back to the ranch. "My pleasure," he replied, tipping his hat. Perhaps, he hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Perhaps you both might like to see the horses someday. If Dr. Morgan could spare you for an afternoon." "Oh, could we, Mama?" Lucy asked, bouncing on her toes in excitement. Kathleen felt a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with horses and everything to do with the man inviting them. "I believe we could arrange that." As they parted ways, Ryan watching them until they turned the corner toward home, neither could have anticipated how soon their paths would cross again, nor the danger that was brewing in Calistoga's shadows, threatening the new life Kathleen was so carefully constructing. 2 days later, Ryan was in town delivering a newly trained horse to its owner when he noticed a crowd gathering outside Silas Turner's saloon. Curious, he secured his own mount and approached, catching fragments of excited conversation. Biggest game in years. Some fancy gambler from Sacramento. Turner's betting the deed to the saloon itself. Ryan frowned, pushing gently through the onlookers until he could see into the saloon. Inside, at the center table, sat Silas Turner opposite a well-dressed stranger with brilliantined hair and a diamond stickpin. Cards and stacks of money covered the green baize between them, but it was the third figure at the table that made Ryan's blood run cold. A lean man with a waxed mustache and cold, calculating eyes, a face he recognized from wanted posters across 3 territories. James Ace Archer, a notorious card-sharp and occasional gunman whose preferred method was to partner with a legitimate gambler to swindle the wealthy and unwary. If Archer was in Calistoga, trouble wasn't far behind. And if Turner was betting the deed to his saloon, he was being played for a fool. Ryan backed away from the window, mind racing. The local sheriff was away in Santa Rosa testifying at a trial, leaving only his young deputy to maintain order. Warning Turner directly would likely only provoke violence. The saloon owner was notorious for his pride and quick temper. As Ryan deliberated, a flash of auburn hair caught his attention. Kathleen was emerging from the doctor's office across the street, medical bag in hand. Without thinking, he crossed to intercept her. "Kathleen," he said quietly, touching her elbow to guide her away from the growing crowd. She started at his touch, then smiled in recognition. "Ryan, I was just heading to deliver medicine to Mr. Collins. His gout is troubling him again." "That may need to wait," he said, keeping his voice low. "There's trouble brewing. A man named Ace Archer is in Turner's saloon." The color drained from Kathleen's face. "Archer? Here in Calistoga?" Ryan's eyes narrowed. "You know him?" She clutched the medical bag tighter, knuckles white against the leather. "He worked at the Golden Peacock occasionally, a cheat and worse." Her eyes darted toward the saloon, fear evident in her expression. "Ryan, he knows me, if he sees me here." Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. "You're not just running from whiskey. You're running from someone." Kathleen nodded, her composure cracking. "Archer was close to the owner. He wanted me to help them cheat customers. When I refused, things became unpleasant. My leaving San Francisco was not entirely voluntary, nor entirely legal in their eyes." Ryan fought to control the anger rising within him. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically, but his threats were convincing." She glanced around nervously. "I need to get to Lucy. She's at the schoolhouse." "If Archer realizes I'm here, go," Ryan said firmly. "Get Lucy and stay at the boarding house. Lock your door." "What are you going to do?" Ryan's expression hardened. "Make sure Mr. Archer's visit to Calistoga is brief and unmemorable." As Kathleen hurried toward the schoolhouse, Ryan returned to the growing spectacle at the saloon. The crowd had swelled, townspeople eager to witness the high-stakes game. Ryan worked his way through until he spotted Deputy Marshal trying ineffectually to maintain order. "Deputy," Ryan said quietly, pulling the young lawman aside. "That fancy gambler in there is working with Ace Archer. They're swindling Turner." The deputy's eyes widened. "Archer, the gunman from the Kansas wanted circulars, the same. Turner's too proud to realize he's being taken, but when he does, there'll be bloodshed." The deputy, barely 20 and new to his badge, paled visibly. "Sheriff Blake won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest. What should we do?" Ryan considered their options. A direct confrontation could turn deadly quickly, especially with so many bystanders. "We need to break up the game without letting Archer know we're onto him. Is Judge Harmon in town?" "Yes, sir. Over at the courthouse reviewing land claims." "Good. Get him and quietly round up any men you trust with firearms. Have them ready but out of sight. I'm going to try something." As the deputy slipped away, Ryan entered the saloon, moving casually to the bar as if simply seeking refreshment. From his position, he could clearly hear the conversation at the central table. "Another hand, Turner," the well-dressed gambler was saying, a practiced smile revealing 2 perfect teeth. "Perhaps this time luck will favor you." Turner, red-faced and sweating, glared across the table. "I know when I'm being played, Hartford. My dear fellow, the cards fall as they may. No one controls fate." From his position nearby, Archer chuckled. "Perhaps Mr. Turner simply lacks the constitution for high-stakes play. No shame in admitting defeat, sir." Ryan recognized the technique goading Turner into continuing despite his mounting losses. He had to act now before the situation escalated. Taking his whiskey, he approached the table. "Gentlemen," he said smoothly, "forgive the interruption, but I couldn't help overhearing." "Mr. Turner, is that the deed to this establishment I see among your stakes?" Turner glowered. "What's it to you, Reynolds? Only that such a significant transaction might require proper documentation. Judge Harmon mentioned to me just this morning that all property transfers in Napa County now require his certification to be legal. This was a complete fabrication, but delivered with such conviction that doubt flickered across Hartford's face. "I've never heard of such a regulation," Archer said suspiciously. Ryan shrugged, taking a casual sip of his whiskey. "Recent county ordinance, after that business in St. Helena with the counterfeit deeds." He turned to Turner. "The judge is at the courthouse now. Perhaps a brief pause to ensure everything's in order. Would be a shame for Mr. Hartford to win, only to find his claim invalid." Turner, seeing an opportunity to save face while reconsidering his recklessness, latched onto the suggestion. "Reynolds is right. Can't have any questions about legality. We'll resume after checking with the judge." Hartford and Archer exchanged glances, clearly displeased but unable to object without arousing suspicion. "Of course," Hartford said smoothly. "I'd hate for there to be any irregularities." As the players stood, Ryan noticed Archer's hand drift toward his jacket, where a pistol undoubtedly rested. But before the situation could deteriorate, the saloon doors swung open and Deputy Marshal entered, flanked by Judge Harmon and 4 armed townsmen. "Mr. Hartford, Mr. Archer," the deputy said, with more authority than Ryan had thought him capable of mustering. "Judge Harmon would like a word with you regarding certain gambling regulations in Calistoga." Archer's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation, outnumbered, outgunned, and now recognized. With a barely perceptible nod to Hartford, he raised his hand slightly. "Always happy to speak with a representative of the law. Lead the way, deputy." As the 2 men were escorted out, Ryan caught Turner's eye. "You might want to check those cards before you bet your livelihood again," he said quietly. Turner frowned, reaching for the deck Hartford had left behind. Examining the cards closely, his expression transformed from confusion to rage as he discovered the marked edges and slight variations that would be visible to a trained eye. "Those thieving bastards," he hissed. "I'll kill them." "They'll be on the afternoon stage," Ryan assured him. Judge Harmon doesn't take kindly to confidence men operating in his jurisdiction. The confrontation resolved more peacefully than Ryan had dared hope. Judge Harmon, a no-nonsense former military officer, had given Hartford and Archer a simple choice: leave on the next stage or face charges of fraud that would mean years in the territorial prison. Facing such odds, the gamblers chose to depart, though not without Archer casting a suspicious glance at Ryan as he boarded the southbound coach. With the immediate threat removed, Ryan's thoughts returned to Kathleen. Dusk was settling over Calistoga as he made his way to the boarding house, concern growing with each step. Had Archer recognized her during his brief stay? Would he return once he realized the connection? Mrs. Hawkins answered his knock, worry evident in her usually cheerful face. "Oh, Mr. Reynolds, thank goodness. Kathleen and Lucy are upstairs. The poor thing is beside herself with fear." He followed her up the narrow staircase to the second floor, where she tapped lightly on a door at the end of the hall. "Kathleen, dear, it's Mrs. Hawkins. Mr. Reynolds is here." The door opened a crack, revealing Kathleen's pale face. When she recognized Ryan, relief flooded her features and she pulled the door wider. "Come in, quickly." The small room was neat but sparsely furnished: a bed where Lucy now slept, a washstand, a small table with 2 chairs, and a trunk presumably containing their few possessions. A half-packed carpetbag lay open on the table. "You're leaving," Ryan observed quietly, removing his hat. Kathleen closed the door behind him, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Lucy. "I have to. If Archer saw me, he didn't," Ryan assured her. "And he's gone. Judge Harmon put him and his partner on the afternoon stage with a warning not to return." She sank into one of the chairs, trembling slightly. "For how long? A week? A month?" "Archer doesn't forgive perceived slights, Ryan. When Mr. Blackfield, the owner of the Golden Peacock, discovers I've left the territory, tell me everything," Ryan said, taking the chair opposite her. "I can't help if I don't understand what we're facing." Kathleen glanced at her sleeping daughter, then back to Ryan. The fear in her eyes was tempered now with a tentative trust. "Archer and Blackfield aren't just business partners. They're cousins. When I refused to help them cheat customers, Blackfield made it clear my position had additional requirements." Her voice faltered. "I refused those as well." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I planned to leave quietly, save enough for train fare. But then Archer caught me looking through Blackfield's account books. I had suspected they were skimming from the girl's earnings, and I found proof." She twisted her hands in her lap. "He threatened to accuse me of theft if I left, said no one would believe a saloon singer over respected businessmen." "So you ran," she nodded. "With only what Lucy and I could carry and the money Dr. Wheeler gave us, I've been terrified of being followed, of being found." "And the whiskey," a sad smile touched her lips. "That was truth as well. I had come to rely on it too much. Liquid courage, they call it. But real courage means facing life clear-eyed, doesn't it?" Ryan reached across the small table, hesitating before covering her clasped hands with one of his own. "You don't have to run anymore, Kathleen. Not from Archer, not from your past." She looked up, doubt and hope warring in her expression. "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're not alone now." The conviction in his voice seemed to reach something deep within her. For a long moment they sat in silence, his hand warm and steady over hers, the connection between them strengthening with each shared breath. Finally, Kathleen gently withdrew her hands, rising to approach the sleeping Lucy. She tucked the blanket more securely around her daughter, brushing a strand of hair from the child's peaceful face. "I've made her so many promises," she whispered. "A stable home, friends, a school, a normal life." She turned back to Ryan, determination replacing fear. "I won't break those promises by running again." Ryan stood, setting his hat on the table. "Then we'll make sure you don't have to." Over the next few weeks, life in Calistoga settled into a new pattern for both Kathleen and Ryan. With Archer's departure, she gradually relaxed her vigilance, though she still startled occasionally at unfamiliar voices or unexpected knocks at the door. Ryan, for his part, found reasons to visit town more frequently than his work required. He brought Lucy a gentle pony to ride, teaching her basic horsemanship with a patience that impressed everyone who witnessed it. He escorted Kathleen to church on Sundays, standing tall and protective beside her as curious townsfolk whispered behind their hands. Slowly, Kathleen's position in the community solidified. Dr. Morgan openly praised her assistant's quick mind and gentle touch with patients. Mrs. Hawkins defended her character to any who questioned it. Even Turner, chastened by his near loss to the gamblers, nodded respectfully when they passed on the street. As summer gave way to early autumn, Ryan completed his contract with the Thompson Ranch. The night before he was scheduled to move on to his next job in Nevada, he invited Kathleen and Lucy to dinner at the Grand Calistoga Hotel. "A celebration," he explained when he extended the invitation. "The last Mustang is gentled, and Mr. Thompson is pleased enough to recommend me to ranchers as far as Wyoming." Kathleen had accepted with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Over the weeks of their growing friendship, she had come to dread this inevitable parting. Ryan Reynolds was a drifter, a man who followed the work rather than putting down roots. She had always known this, had reminded herself of it whenever her heart quickened at his approach or his hand lingered on hers a moment longer than necessary. The evening arrived with a bittersweet anticipation. Lucy, dressed in her Sunday best with a blue ribbon in her hair, chattered excitedly about the special occasion as they walked to the hotel. Kathleen, in a modest but becoming green dress she had purchased with her first full month's wages, felt a nervous fluttering in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Ryan was waiting for them in the hotel lobby, and the sight of him took Kathleen's breath away. Gone was the dusty cowboy in working denims. In his place stood a gentleman in a well-cut dark suit, his usually unruly hair tamed, his face clean-shaven. Only the weathered tan of his face and hands betrayed his outdoor profession. "You look beautiful," he said simply as they approached, his eyes never leaving Kathleen's face despite Lucy's enthusiastic twirling to display her own finery. "As do you," she replied softly. "I hardly recognized you without trail dust." He offered his arm with a smile. "My father would be pleased to know I remember how to clean up properly." The dining room was elegant but not ostentatious, with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and silver cutlery that gleamed in the soft lamplight. A small orchestra played quietly in the corner, providing a genteel backdrop to the murmur of conversation. As they were seated at a table near the windows overlooking the hotel's gardens, Kathleen noticed several of Calistoga's prominent citizens among the other diners. Dr. Morgan nodded from across the room where she dined with the town's banker and his wife. Judge Harmon raised his glass in subtle greeting from his solitary table. "Everyone is looking at us," Kathleen whispered as the waiter presented menus. Ryan glanced around, unconcerned. "Let them look. We have nothing to hide." The meal was the finest Kathleen had eaten in years: roast duck with cherry sauce, tender vegetables, fresh baked bread, and a chocolate souffle that made Lucy's eyes widen with delight. Throughout dinner, conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by Lucy's observations and questions that often made both adults laugh. As the dessert plates were cleared and Lucy became distracted by the orchestra, Ryan's expression grew more serious. "Kathleen," he began, his voice low, "there's something I need to discuss with you." She braced herself for the farewell she had been dreading. "Yes, I've been offered another position, a permanent one." This wasn't what she had expected. "Permanent? I thought you preferred to move with the seasons." "I did, or I thought I did." He hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. "Judge Harmon owns a horse breeding operation in the valley. His foreman is retiring and he's asked me to take the position." Hope blossomed in Kathleen's chest, though she tried to temper it. "Here, in Calistoga." Ryan nodded, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "It's a good opportunity. Steady work, a proper house on the property, room for a family." His eyes held hers, intent and earnest. "I told him I needed to discuss it with someone before accepting." "With me?" Kathleen's voice was barely a whisper. "With you?" He took a deep breath. "Kathleen, I've spent the last decade drifting from place to place, never staying long enough to form attachments. It was easier that way after the war, after losing my parents, but these past weeks with you and Lucy." He squeezed her hand gently. "You've reminded me what it means to belong somewhere, to someone." Tears pricked at Kathleen's eyes. "Ryan, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you, both of you. And if you'll have me, I want to build a life here, together." The world seemed to still around them, the restaurant's noise fading to a distant hum as Kathleen absorbed his words. After years of struggle, of mistakes and hard choices, of fighting alone for her daughter's future, could happiness really be this simple, this attainable? "You hardly know me," she said softly, voicing her deepest fear. "My past is past," he interrupted firmly. "I know the woman you are now, the mother who would sacrifice anything for her child, the healer who treats every patient with compassion, the friend who listens without judgment." His voice softened. "The woman I think about from the moment I wake until I fall asleep." Lucy, who had been watching the adults with growing interest, piped up suddenly. "Are you going to marry my mama, Mr. Reynolds?" The directness of the child's question startled a laugh from Ryan. "Well, Miss Lucy, I was working my way around to asking something along those lines, yes." Lucy nodded, completely unsurprised. "Good. Mrs. Hawkins says you look at Mama like she hung the moon and stars, and that means you're in love." "Lucy!" Kathleen exclaimed, mortified but unable to suppress a smile. Ryan grinned at the child. "Mrs. Hawkins is a very perceptive lady." "But," he turned back to Kathleen, his expression growing serious again, "I should do this properly." Before she realized his intention, he had left his chair to kneel beside hers, still holding her hand. Around them, other diners began to notice, conversations faltering as attention shifted to their table. "Kathleen Vance," Ryan said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I love you more than I thought possible. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" The restaurant had gone completely silent now, all eyes on their small tableau. In that suspended moment, Kathleen saw her past and future with perfect clarity, the long road that had led her here, and the one that stretched ahead, no longer solitary but shared. "Yes," she answered, her voice breaking on the simple word. "Yes, I will." The dining room erupted in applause as Ryan rose to embrace her, Lucy bouncing excitedly beside them. When he kissed her, gently and reverently, Kathleen felt the last of her defenses crumble. This was what pouring out that whiskey bottle had truly meant, not just rejecting her past, but making space for a future she had never dared imagine. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in Calistoga's small church, with autumn leaves creating a tapestry of gold and crimson outside the stained glass windows. Judge Harmon officiated, his usual stern demeanor softened by the occasion. Dr. Morgan stood as Kathleen's matron of honor, while Mr. Thompson served as Ryan's best man. Lucy, radiant in a new blue dress, proudly carried the rings. As Kathleen walked down the aisle toward Ryan, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the span of a few short months. From a woman pouring out whiskey in desperate determination to change her fate, to a bride surrounded by friends and well-wishers, stepping confidently into a future bright with promise. Ryan's eyes never left hers as she approached, his expression a mixture of awe and devotion that made her heart swell. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, the connection between them felt as natural and necessary as breathing. "Dearly beloved," Judge Harmon began, his resonant voice filling the small church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other the courage to begin anew." The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain. When Ryan slipped the gold band onto Kathleen's finger, his hands were steady, his touch gentle. When she did the same for him, she felt the significance of the moment like a physical weight, this tangible symbol of commitment, of choosing to face whatever came next together rather than alone. "By the authority vested in me by the state of California," Judge Harmon concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Reynolds, you may kiss your bride." Ryan's kiss was tender but filled with promise, a perfect balance of restraint and passion that left Kathleen breathless. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors, now as husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers and applause. Lucy rushed forward to embrace them both, her face alight with joy. "We're a real family now," she exclaimed, and both adults laughed, Ryan sweeping the child into his arms. "We certainly are," he agreed, his free arm circling Kathleen's waist. The Reynolds family. The reception was held at Judge Harmon's estate, a sprawling property with vineyards and horse pastures stretching toward the mountains. Tables had been set up in the garden, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Hawkins and other ladies from town. A local string band provided music, and as the afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, couples began to dance on the wooden platform erected for the occasion. Ryan led Kathleen in their first dance as husband and wife, moving with a grace that belied his rugged profession. "Happy?" he asked softly as they swayed to the music. "Beyond words," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "I never thought this would be possible for me." "Nor I," he admitted. "But here we are." As the celebration continued, Kathleen found herself drawn into conversation with various townsfolk who had once viewed her with suspicion, but now offered genuine congratulations. Even Turner approached, awkwardly presenting a fine crystal decanter filled with water as a wedding gift. "Seemed appropriate," he muttered, nodding toward Kathleen with newfound respect, "given how we first noticed you in town." Later, as the sun began to set and lanterns were lit around the garden, Kathleen found a moment of quiet with Lucy. The child, tired from excitement and dancing, leaned against her mother's side on a bench beneath an oak tree. "Mama," she said sleepily, "is our new house very far away?" Kathleen smiled, stroking her daughter's hair. "Not far at all. It's here on the judge's property where Ryan will work with the horses. You'll have your own room and there's a pony waiting for you in the stable." Lucy's eyes widened despite her fatigue. "My very own, your very own. And you'll still go to the same school and see all your friends. And you'll still help Dr. Morgan," Kathleen nodded. 2 days a week. The rest of the time I'll be taking care of our home and helping Ryan. Lucy considered this solemnly. And no more moving, no more running away in the night. The question pierced Kathleen's heart with its innocence and understanding. Lucy had absorbed more of their difficult past than she had realized. No more running, she promised, hugging her daughter close. This is our home now. Forever. Ryan found them there a few minutes later, carrying 3 slices of wedding cake. He handed plates to his new wife and stepdaughter before settling beside them on the bench. Judge Harmon just showed me something interesting, he said, an excited undercurrent in his voice. The breeding operation is doing well enough that he's considering expanding. He wants to add a program specifically for training horses for women and children to ride safely. Kathleen raised an eyebrow. And he wants you to run it. Better than that, Ryan grinned. He wants us to run it together. He's seen how you handle the horses when you visit, and he thinks a woman's perspective would be valuable. It would be a partnership, my experience with training, your gentle approach with the animals. A family business, Kathleen mused, warmth spreading through her at the thought. Exactly. Something we can build together, maybe even pass down someday. He glanced meaningfully at Lucy, then back to Kathleen with a question in his eyes. She understood immediately. To our children, she agreed softly. This one and perhaps others to come. Ryan's smile was radiant as he leaned in to kiss her, tasting of cake and promise and possibilities. As evening deepened into night, the newlyweds bid farewell to their guests and departed for the small but comfortable foreman's house that would be their new home. Lucy had fallen asleep hours earlier and was being cared for by Mrs. Hawkins for the night, giving the couple their first precious hours of privacy. The house waited for them, lanterns glowing in the windows like beacons of welcome. Ryan lifted Kathleen into his arms to carry her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. Inside, someone likely Dr. Morgan or Mrs. Hawkins had prepared the house for their arrival. Fresh flowers adorned the tables, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the bedroom beckoned with clean linens and the scent of lavender. "It's perfect," Kathleen whispered, taking in their new home with wonder. After years of rented rooms and temporary lodgings, the solidity of their place felt miraculous. Ryan watched her explore the rooms, his heart full to bursting with love for this strong, resilient woman who had entrusted her future to him. When she turned back to him, her eyes shining with happiness and something deeper, more intimate, he crossed to her in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. "I love you, Kathleen Reynolds," he murmured against her hair, savoring the sound of her new name. She tilted her face up to his, all the barriers and doubts of her past finally laid to rest. "And I love you, Ryan Reynolds, for giving us a new life." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepened with the passion they had restrained during their courtship. As they moved toward the bedroom, toward the beginning of their life together as husband and wife, both knew with absolute certainty that they had found in each other not just love, but home. 5 years later, the Reynolds horse farm had become one of the most respected breeding and training operations in Northern California. Their specialty in gentle, reliable mounts for women and children had attracted clients from as far as San Francisco and Sacramento, with a waiting list that extended months into the future. On a bright spring morning, Kathleen stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Ryan demonstrate a training technique to their newest apprentice. Lucy, now 11 and remarkably skilled with horses for her age, sat attentively on the corral fence, occasionally offering observations that made both men smile. In the shade of a nearby oak, 3-year-old Thomas Reynolds played with wooden blocks, his dark hair and serious expression so like his father's that it sometimes made Kathleen's heart ache with love. Beside him, baby Emma slept peacefully in her cradle, her wisps of auburn hair catching the dappled sunlight. As if sensing her gaze, Ryan looked up from the corral, his smile as warm and genuine as the day she had first agreed to marry him. He excused himself from the apprentice and walked toward the house, removing his hat as he approached. Admiring the view, he teased, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Always," she replied with a smile, making room for him on the porch steps. "I was just thinking about how far we've come." Ryan nodded, his eyes tracking over their property, the neat barns and paddocks, the flower gardens Kathleen had planted, the small schoolhouse they had built not just for their own children, but for those of their workers as well. "Remember that whiskey bottle?" he asked suddenly, a reminiscent smile playing at his lips. Kathleen laughed softly. "How could I forget? My grand gesture of determination." "I knew right then you were different," he said, taking her hand. "Most women who'd had hard times would have drunk it. Most men too, myself included at certain points in my life. But you poured it out. You chose your future over your past." She leaned against his shoulder, content in the solid warmth of him. "I didn't know then that the future would include all of this. You, our family, this place." From the corral, Lucy called out excitedly, drawing their attention to the yearling colt she was leading through a series of simple commands. The horse responded beautifully to her quiet confidence, a testament to both Ryan's training methods and Lucy's natural gift with animals. "She's going to outshine us both one day," Ryan predicted proudly. "I'm counting on it," Kathleen agreed. "The Reynolds horse farm should stay in the family for generations." Ryan squeezed her hand, his expression growing thoughtful. "You know, I received a letter from Judge Harmon yesterday. He's retiring completely, moving to his daughter's place in Oregon. He wants to sell us his share of the operation." Kathleen sat up straighter, surprise evident in her face. "The entire breeding program. Could we afford it? With the savings we've put aside and a loan from the bank?" "Yes." "It would be a stretch for a few years, but by the time Lucy's old enough to take on real responsibility, we'd have it paid off." The magnitude of the opportunity sank in slowly. What had begun as a foreman's position had already grown into a partnership. Full ownership would mean complete control over their business, their legacy. "What do you think?" Ryan asked, watching her process the information. Kathleen gazed out at their land, their children, the life they had built together from such unlikely beginnings. A saloon singer with a tarnished past, and a drifting cowboy with war shadows in his eyes who could have predicted they would create something so enduring, so filled with purpose. "I think," she said finally, turning to meet his gaze with confidence, "that we should trust ourselves enough to take this next step, together, as we've done everything else." Ryan's smile broadened, relief and excitement mingling in his expression. "I was hoping you'd say that." "I've already drafted a response accepting his offer." Kathleen laughed, shoving his shoulder playfully. "You were that certain of me, always," he replied, suddenly serious. "From that first day when you poured out that whiskey and declared yourself done with that life. I've been certain of you ever since." As they sat together on the porch steps of their home, watching their children and planning their future, Kathleen reflected on the long, unlikely journey that had brought her here. From desperate choices to deliberate ones. From running away to standing firm. From pouring out a bottle of whiskey in defiance to building a legacy of love and purpose that would outlast them both. She had indeed been done with that life. But this one was just beginning.